Hey Doodlers, how are you doing? This is my Creative Career 3.1. In case you don't know what I'm talking about, I am going through lots of memories about my artistic career, the journey from very young, and all the kind of influences that kind of led me to where I am today, I suppose. And in doing so, I hope to explain things to you. I hope to explain things to myself, and maybe give solace to some people who are going through various stages that I've been before. And I know there've been one or two comments with people saying, "Oh, thank goodness, I'm not the only one who is going through this or has gone through all these kind of things." So this is 3.1. Because episode 3 leaves with me just about to go to art school, and I think there's a whole lot of other stuff that goes on before there which has nothing to do with actually art or drawing. And I suppose the easiest place to start is kind of 1963, when I was 6 years old, and the Beatles burst onto the scene. And I remember we watched a program called Thank Your Lucky Stars, which was like the pop program of the time. And the Beatles came on and sang I Want to Hold Your Hand or Love Me Do or something. And I vaguely remember us going, "Oh, well, no, they're no good." But and I've looked up the dates because I vaguely remember at that time I was far more excited by Freddie and the Dreamers with a song called "You Were Made for Me," and Freddie would leap about the stage. I'll put a link to a video. You'll have to go see it afterwards. Kind of, it was like a British Buddy Holly copy, I suppose. And he would leap about the stage, doing all this stuff. And as a 6-year-old, I was quite sort of taken by that. And not so much with the Beatles and all their hold your hand stuff. It was a bit lovey-dovey, I suppose. My dad was very taken by them. The Beatles just burst on the scene in a very, very short time. They had their first single in 1963. My dad left to go to Aden. We were in the military, so he left in just after Christmas. So within that year, so much, this country changed, it altered, and the Beatles were a big part of that. And John Lennon was coming out with all his all this philosophy. We must have milk on the table, the bottle on the table, don't put it into a jug, and we mustn't put biscuits in a tin, just put the packet on the table, because that's what John Lennon says. And I remember at that time that I just used to sing all the time, and it was just singing all the pop songs, and just mad for the pop songs. Oh, with a little transistor radio glued to my ear. and every Sunday night, I don't know what it was about, sort of coming up. I think it was finishing at 6 o'clock. There would be the top 40, and they would play all the top. Or was it just the top 20? Anyway, they would play all the top of the pops. And who was going to be number one this week? It was just so exciting. And I would just sing pop songs all the time. And then there was a stage my dad decided, well, maybe he just sings all the time. Maybe we could, get him into a choir school, get a decent education for free. So he coaxed me to sing "The Wings of a Dove," but accompanying me on his recorder. And entered me for these to try and get a place at King's College Choir School. Now, if you've ever seen at Christmas time, on Christmas Eve, the service of 9 lessons and carols coming from King's College Chapel, that's the choir that he wanted me to get into, which is not easy to get into. Anyway, and also there was some kind of family connection, because my grandfather was a vicar, and he'd been trained by somebody who I think was maybe even the head there, or he had some connection anyway. So, and I went along, and I didn't know anything about music. And then there was actually a written test. There was maths and stuff like that, which I didn't know anything about. I felt completely out of my depth. Obviously, didn't get in. And I did my Wings of a Dove, la la la. And I'm sure they said, "Thank you very much. That was lovely." Next. and off we went. So obviously, my dad had spotted that I sang all the time. So that was quite something, it was a thing. And looking back, I never wanted to be in a choir. At school, I didn't, really sing. But we used to have a guy come. I think he came sort of once a week on Mondays or something like that, and then every class in the school would go in for half an hour with him, and he would just play away on the piano, and we had this book of songs. Now, when I think about it, the stuff we were singing was this appalling, racist, colonialist stuff, and we were kind of being inculcated with all this stuff. But they had jolly good tunes, and we sang along, and he was very good at getting us going, and we learned all these tunes and songs, and it was one of my favourite lessons of the week, just singing along. I never really knew what the songs were about, and it's only sort of years and years later, it was like, oh my Lord, what was that all about? And I suppose the school was part of that whole system, and it was the end of the British Empire. Being a military child, the army paid for us to go to these schools, where basically we were being trained to become British Army officers and to not think too much and just to lead troops into battle. And if we showed any kind of intelligence, then maybe we'd go into Parliament or possibly go and sort of run industry instead. And if you were at all dodgy, then you have to go out to the Empire and go and run a rubber plantation or something like that. And when I think about it, geography lessons that we had were all about the empire and all about the products coming from the empire. And again, they were teaching us basically how to run rubber plantations, how to chop down trees in Canada and run timber factories. And it's appalling. No, I think I've sort of come out quite well, actually, considering. But all the time, I think I knew it was wrong, and I always rebelled and didn't fit in, and I didn't want to be in their choirs. I knew that. I was going to go to this weird school, a second school. So in the British private system, you do this exam called Common Entrance when you're 13, which then gives you access to your public school, which isn't public at all, it's very private. And again, the army would be paying for that. And the whole British public school system, again, is training the leaders of the future. That our past few prime ministers have all come from Eton, and I didn't go to Eton. I went to a school called King's School Canterbury, which I hated, absolutely hated. Rebelled at every kind of opportunity, really. I would just sit down and say no. Every boy coming in, it was just a boys' school, had to be assessed for the choir. And I knew that I could sing. And so I did this terrible audition, and they kind of looked at me like, you know what you're doing. You know how to sing badly, so that means you're probably quite good. And they kept trying to trick me into the choir, and I just didn't want to do that. Now, looking back, it's funny, I had an interesting conversation yesterday about somebody who does training sessions. And they were saying they kind of sort people into introverts and extroverts. And they were saying, but, it doesn't mean you're an introvert. You're just like, a little mouse. And I said, no, I think, if you stick me on a stage, you can't get me off. But once I'm off, I want to go off and be on my own again. and I'm very happy on my own doing stuff, the thousands of hours I spent in this tiny little shed. And while I'm editing this, then I remember I did join the choral society, but that was for a very specific reason, because we would join up with 2 girls' schools locally and singing rock and roll. It's all about the girls, And another thing, my friend Glyn, who I mentioned in the previous video, we sort of got friendly with some day boys. So we had somewhere to escape to, like family homes, where we would maybe get tea and coffee and that kind of thing. And there was one particular friend that we had we would go around to. And he was a brilliant musician. He was really into more pop culture, though. And his house, I first encountered like electric guitars and this potential other exciting world of rock and roll. And I would often exclude myself from things that were going on, the team kind of things, and frequently would just sit down and say, I'm not playing this stupid game. The whole public school system is all about team spirit, and it's all about, play up and play the game. So I didn't fit in there, and I managed to get my parents. So my dad left the army, and they moved to Bedford, and right at the end of the street was Bedford School, which was a public school. So I managed to convince them to let me go there and become a day boy for the first time since I was 5 years old. I was actually living at home. and I'd already got friends, including my wife now, and we just decided we were going to start a band. So Simon had a drum kit. He played a big role later on. And I think we might have had a couple of guitars, and I decided I was going to spend some of my savings and get an electric guitar. I think I had convinced myself this is how you impress the ladies, prance about with an electric guitar, and I couldn't work it out at all. And so I ended up just singing, and we did all kind of Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple kind of stuff. We were absolutely terrible, and all our practice sessions would just end up screaming matches. They were terrible, and in fact the best things we ever did was we got all the Simon had this enormous record collection. He just constantly buying records, so we would borrow a couple of gramophones, the things which had little lids that lifted up, and we would put them on a table at the church hall, and we would do discos. And I would screw light bulbs together, and health and safety, what a nightmare. One night, one of the amplifiers blew up. Kaboom! The capacitor exploded. There was tissue paper floating in the air. Everyone thought it was a fantastic special effect. And every now and then, I think the screaming matches would just get to me. And that's it. Right, I'm going solo. And that was a big sort of catchphrase. I'm going solo. And I did, and I never really played in a band again, well, for a long time. And then my Auntie June gave me, for Christmas, she gave me a Teach Yourself to Play the Guitar book. And there was a little A5 kind of, little pocket kind of book. And it was really good. And it really started off with really simple songs. And they were kind of simple blues songs. And so I learnt my first 3 chords. And I practiced, and I would take my guitar to bed and play in the dark as I was going to sleep, so that I didn't have to think about where the chords were, didn't have to look, rather. I just kind of do it in the dark. And I started playing those sort of songs, and the audience seemed to like it, school audience, of course, and the girls seemed to like it too. I had my 3 chords, and I thought I'd start writing songs, and I did, and I used to write endless songs, and some of them were basically the same, some of them were completely rubbish, and 1 or 2 I think were quite good, and people would start joining in after a while, as they got to know them, and that was a real surprise. I remember the first time people joined in on one of my songs. But unfortunately, I think the day of the singer-songwriter was over. I did a few kind of live sessions in pubs and things like that. I remember I went a bit like going around trying to get work as a signwriter. I spent the day just walking around the town, going to all the pubs with my guitar. Hello, can I come and sing here? And a couple of people said, yeah, come along. And they said, come along Sunday night. So I had to go and learn some Beatles songs and stuff that people actually knew. And this terrible one night, and I just sat there in the corner, and nobody paid me any attention. Just carried. And so every now and then somebody would send a drink over, and I wasn't getting paid, I don't think. And then at the end of the night, somebody just came home and said, thanks, that was really nice. but I had these kind of musical ambitions. And I think, when you see, it's a joke that you see people standing in front of a mirror in their bedroom and they got a holding the hairbrush as a microphone. I would be totally transported while playing and singing songs. And I think that's probably all I really wanted was just to do that. All sorts of things sort of trigger off these memories. I'm sorry I'm going on, aren't I? Just recently we went to see the Barbie movie. There's this totally cringy moment where Ryan Gosling is playing his guitar, singing exactly the kind of songs I used to write. And Barbie's gritting her teeth saying, "Oh, that's lovely." I thought, oh no. Oh, how embarrassing. All those girls I was trying to woo with my songs, were they just smiling and through gritted teeth? Very possibly. And I apologise to you all if you ever happen to go and find this and watch it. But I think that was also part of the time, and the Barbie thing is kind of reflecting that time. It's very serious at the time. I've had these two guitars, a nice white Strat and an acoustic, and they've just sat there idle pretty much for 20 years. And every now and then, I suppose twice a year, I pick them up, ding, 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 put them down again. Not even the electric, never plug it in. I hardly listen to music at all now. And I finally said to my wife, I think I'm going to sell these and just, She said, you can't do that. Just keep them. So I said, well, if I'm going to keep them, I'll just sort of clean them up a bit. So I cleaned them up, cleaned the amp up, and I'll just try. Well, I bought 2 new guitars since. I got a new acoustic guitar, and the guy in the shop was saying, what do you want to do? Because I was trying out all these acoustic guitars. He said, what is it you want? I said, basically, I just want to play The Wheels on the Bus to my grandchildren one day. He said, that's fine, And I found the guitar that I liked. And so I'm kind of playing again. But I don't want to perform, and I don't want to join a band. And I'm quite happy just sitting down 10, 20 minutes in a little world of my own. And I think that's fair enough. However, back in those days, I think I really kind of wanted to be, I don't know, rock and roll star, pop star, whatever. It was almost like an illness. And I think a lot of people get it. Have you ever watched those talent shows? They don't do it anymore now because it's sort of bullying, really. And they would get people coming along who were terrible, and they would get them to perform, and then they would sort of ridicule them, and they'd storm off saying, I'll show you one day. Well, that would have been me, I think. So I used to go to folk clubs a lot, and they were great because you could, I think it's called Singers' Night now, I suppose, and you would get up and do your turn, and I would get up and do my turn, and as the evening went on, each time it came round to your turn, of course I'd had a little bit more to drink, and it would get more and more slurry. And I suppose everyone else was. But I don't think alcohol really mixed with trying to be a musician, because you think you were being good, but you weren't. You were being terrible. And so I never really put the work into the craft of playing, I suppose. I just thought it was just an emotional thing, and it's all about the emotion, not so much about the craft of it. In that case, of course, with a lot of emotion flying around, everything can go wrong. And it generally did. But it was always there. It was always there. And the songwriting was always there. And I was writing 2, 3, 4 songs a week. and at school as well, I remember, English. If we were given an essay for homework, I'll try and write something, but then, I'll just write this lyric. And I was writing these very complicated lyrics with internal rhyming and stuff like that. And one day a teacher found out, my English teacher said, wait a minute, what? There's a complete mismatch between what you're doing here, writing all this music, and trying to write stuff at school. I said, I'm not interested in that. So I think the songwriting was like a training for when I became a children's author. And it was that sort of concise storytelling, I suppose. And the storytelling then is a whole other thing. I was obsessed with stories, and growing up, it was a golden age of BBC drama. And on the BBC radio, there would be plays and stories and readings constantly. And there would be an afternoon play, would be for like 2 hours long, which just doesn't happen anymore. And every day you never knew what was going to be on. It might be some ancient Greek thing, and then the next day it might be a police drama, then a kitchen sink drama, a love story, whatever. And there's this fantastic spread of experience listening to these stories, and I'm very happy at home in my own company listening to stories. So that was feeding me. I think also there's a little bit of me thinking, when I grow up, I don't really want to go to work, because then I can't listen to the radio. I can't listen to all these stories. I can't listen to pop songs. So I was really, I suppose, deep down thinking, is there a way that I can be at home, have the radio on all day, listening to pop music, and then turning over to a story, a play, back to a pop music channel? That was kind of my ideal. So there are all these kind of things going on, which are this sort of creative feed that was inspiring me and pushing me and pulling me. This kind of establishment thing that I was kicking against the whole time. And I'll just finish off talking about the Beatles. So my dad was a big fan of the Beatles. He had a terrible war. He was out in Burma at a battle called Kohima, which is, some military historians say, is probably the bloodiest, ghastliest battle of the Second World War. And he survived, and now I look back, I know he was PTSD victim the rest of his life. There was a lot of alcohol involved, binge drinking, which I learned from as well. That's a whole other thing. I kind of I learned how to binge drink from a very young age, and that's not a good thing to do. But he was a very deep thinker. In fact, there's a letter has come to light just recently from his commanding officer in 1944 in Burma, after they'd been relieved, and he was having a mental breakdown, basically. Although they didn't want to say that because that would put a mark on his career, but they kind of shifted him back home, and they were saying that he had been captured by the Sikhs, not captured by, but captured by the Sikh culture. And while he was out there, he learned Sanskrit, he learned Urdu, and Hindi as well, and was sort of very into the Indian culture. And he was shipped back, and they was on his thing. He said he must never ever come to India again. He needs to go back and get married to a good English gal. That didn't work because he married my mother, who's Norwegian. But in the 60s, then in the 1960s, then he was working at the Ministry of Defence in London. And at lunchtimes, he found this guy called the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And so he would go off with his bowler hat and umbrella to the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi meditation sessions, lunchtime meditation sessions, and was getting into all this sort of Indian stuff again. And then he came home one day very fed up because the Beatles had turned up at one of these sessions and the whole thing had turned into a complete puppy show, and the press were there, and it was just so he was very cross. And then the next week he was even more cross because the Beatles just grabbed hold of the Maharishi and took him away, and he never saw him again. And so there's that whole kind of weird thing going on at home. My dad, although he was in the army, he was a British Army officer, he was anti-establishment too. He was always kicking and against it all. Yeah, but anyway, I feel that's kind of an important stuff to throw in there that has nothing to do with drawing, nothing to do with art, but it's all part of that creative that kind of pushes you in certain directions. And one last interjection here as I'm editing, I'm thinking, my dear mother, she was mad about Italian opera. And so it was all morto, suicido, oh, and it was all the time. These drunken weekends, Italian opera blaring out, and Puccini heroines throwing themselves off battlements, dying of consumption. And they took me one time, and I loved it. I thought it was wonderful, dramatic and emotional. And one time they took me to the opera in London. It was like a really big day out, sort of big memory. And we went to see La Boheme, and it was just a fantastic kind of experience. And but this this drama that was going on, and I think particularly La Boheme, that was her favourite, and which she kind of. It came in mother's milk, didn't it, really? and it's all about starving in garrets, and it just gave me this whole concept of what being an artist was about. It was about drama, it was about sacrifice, and living in garrets and starving and dying of awful diseases. So that was like a massive influence on what my understanding of what being an artist was about. And when I when I eventually got to art school, well, it was nothing like that, and it was a kind of a real disappointment, because everyone else was just kind of, just drawing. I know some people, they don't have the same background, but they have sort of similar things they can maybe relate to that have gone on, and people decide, no, I'm not doing this, and they toe the line and kind of become part of the establishment. I remember at one point I was at a publisher's party and I was saying, oh look, there's so-and-so, oh so-and-so, so-and-so, it's like the establishment here. And they said to me, but Shu, you are part of the establishment now. You're one of them. Never mind about that. Maybe it's time now that I just talk about art college, which will be part 4. Thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed to the Shu Rainer Joy channel if you want to know more about all this stuff on the Shu Rainer Joy channel. And in the meantime, keep drawing, singing, doing whatever it is you do. It's all part of the juice that comes together to make who you are. Thanks for watching. You take care now. Bye-bye.